Right. So in this episode, we'll be discussing democracy index, and so far as that most of us are concerned, there are a lot of states which are classified as democracy. So in this episode, we'll be discussing how or some of the variables that we look at before we classify a state as democracy, and how can you know that one state or this particular state A is more democratic than the other.
Thank you for this brilliant question. Before I will even begin addressing that, let me walk um, you all through um, democracy. When we talk of democracy, um, we have two streams of definition. We have the procedural and then the substantive. The procedural talks about the kind of mechanisms, processes to make democracy work. And that is usually what we call the minimalist approach. So when states have electoral processes, so they organize elections, once they meet that minimum criteria, we say they are democracies. That's the minimalist approach, also called Schumpeterian approach. Okay, yeah, Schumpeterian approach. Once states have this, once they meet that minimum criteria of putting in place mechanisms for electing leaders, then you can say they are democracies. But that is the minimalist approach. We have the substantive approach, which looks at the real value that the democracy provides in terms of what are the real checks on the powers of the executive. To what extent is the electoral process so open, transparent, okay, that it allows even opposition parties to operate free and fairly? In how much does a democracy enhance the socio-economic livelihoods of the people? That is the substantive nature. In how much does a democracy allow civil liberties? In how much does it allow, for people to participate? Okay, and those are the issues of substantive democracy. So you can't talk of real democracy when the substantive aspects are missing. So some scholars argue that you can't talk of democracy when there's extreme, poverty, when there's what extreme lack of access to basic, facilities, amenities. That is why even when we want to examine which states are more, democratic, some of these elements are embedded. But now let's bring the argument home. As scholars of comparative politics, or as people who want to understand the similarities and differences among different states, for us to know which country is more democratic, there is a way we measure it. We systematically measure it. And the Economist Intelligence Unit, okay, EIU, uses what we call democracy index. The Economist Intelligence Unit, EIU, uses what we call democracy index to measure which countries are doing well in terms of democracy. And by democracy, we put the procedural as well as the substantive elements together. And they systematically measure this. And across at least about 167 states and territories to examine which ones are doing very well. So they have some 60 different questions they ask, cutting across different indicators. 60 questions across different indicators. And these 60 questions, they are framed along 5 main variables or criteria. So they look at the civil liberties, okay, To what extent does the state allow people's individual freedoms, liberties, and then, are they able to speak their mind? Are they able to join associations? These are the civil liberties. To what extent does the state allow for people to participate in the process? Are people allowed to demonstrate against the regime and that they will come back home in one accord, not one that the state will intimidate people that they cannot even demonstrate or protest? So the ERU measures this also across all the states that it carries this across. Then we also, and this is the fundamental, we measure the electoral process of the states. The electoral process and pluralism. To what extent does it allow for multi-party election? Okay, is it free and fair? We also measure that. The political culture. It also measures the political culture. Then the functioning of government. More important. So these 5 variables, they systematically collect what data on it. And then they evaluate, they measure all different states. And so they assign a score for each of the 5 variables. They assign a score on a scale of 0 to 10. If you get 10, it means you are doing very well. That's fantastic. 10 is a perfect score. So the higher your mark, the better it is for you on that particular variable. And at the end of the process, all the 5 variables are also aggregated. So based on the scores you had for the 5 different, we aggregate the score. So the average will be on a scale of 0 to 10. If you get 10, that is a perfect score. It means, you are very advanced in terms of democratic credentials. So based on the 0 to 10, the democracy index. So that is the democracy index. Based on your score on this index, if you get from 0 to 3.99, you are not doing well. We call it authoritarian regime. Okay, authoritarian regime, and I will come back to authoritarian regime in the next episode. Okay, these regimes, power is so concentrated at the top. There are no civil liberties. Okay, there are no checks and balances on the powers of the rulers. If you get from 4 to 5.99, you are called hybrid regime. Okay, that one you are half authoritarian, half democracy, and so things are not very well with you. Now, if you get from 6 to 7.99, you are classified as a flawed democracy. Here, your electoral systems are better advanced, such that even opposition party is able to win power, and the government in power, will transfer power. So in terms of the electoral process, it is far advanced. Civil liberties, of course, they also meet the minimum criteria. The people have fundamental freedoms, freedom of speech, association. Those ones, the minimum ones are met. But the political culture is not so advanced, and the function of government is also not advanced. And Ghana finds itself here. Ghana is in the flawed democracy zone. Of course, US is also in this same zone. So those times when you ask students which country is the most democratic, they are first to mention US, and I'll tell you, no, the US is even a flawed democracy. Back to the democracy index. So on that scale, if you get from 8 to 10, you are classified as a full democracy. It means your electoral process is well advanced, multi-party democracy enhanced, political culture fully developed, function of government advanced. political participation, civil liberties, all top notch. And so that is how we are able to indicate which country is more democratic. And consistently over time, Norway has been on the top of the league, which suggests that in terms of its electoral process, top notch, civil liberties, top notch, political participation, top notch, function of government, top notch, political culture, and that is how we are able to comprehensively, measure the democracy index. So you are able to tell of all the 5 variables which ones, particular states are performing well. For instance, if you take Ghana, Ghana does well in the electoral process and pluralism. But when it comes to the others, function of government, political culture, we are always, maybe 5. That's the average. So it is the electoral process that pushes Ghana. Otherwise, it will become a hybrid regime. But also there is a fear there. Over time, the score has been reducing. Has been reducing gradually. That if care is not taken. But I'll make a whole video on that. That even though we are still within the flawed democracy zone, the rate with which we are reducing in terms of the scale, it is at an alarming rate, which means we need to do well on the variables, these 5 variables. We need to do well. Thank you.